Hey everyone, welcome to At the Root of It. Today I have my friend Chris Harris here, and we're going to talk about what's at the root of values. Chris, do you want to give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Ooh, what's at the root of that? That's a fun question. Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Harris. Pronouns are he and his. I am a 6'1" tall Black African American man with dreadlocks that go a little bit past my shoulders. Currently full body abled. Yeah, and I currently work as the director for the Office for Multicultural Learning, which includes the Rainbow Resource Center at Santa Clara University in Silicon Valley. And I'm also the director for Campus Climate and Belonging. So, full title is all sorts of things that I do, get pulled into like student facing events, staff and faculty events and support. But overall, just like focused on building community and affirmation for folks. I'm from Michigan originally. I've been in California for like 4 years now. It's been a wild ride being someone east of the Mississippi and looking at this place called California for forever. And we're like, what is up with that place, bro? And then actually coming out here with my wife and my three daughters and our dog. All of those things really kind of like led me to be here and kind of hopscotching my career mostly around youth service spaces, leadership development spaces, nonprofit education. I was a teacher. I taught kindergarten for 8 years in a couple of different states. So yeah, I've been all over the place, but very much have centered my career on caring for people and being like a servant first, and then allowing the people around me to then dictate how I can pivot, turn, and then offer support in the ways that I can do most authentically. So yeah, that's kind of like the Chris Harris intro spiel, and then a quick little 30 seconds.
So, uh, you know, maybe in the context of today's episode around values, what did the world look like for you when you were growing up, and maybe like coming out of high school? Like, what were the things that were influencing you at that time?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. And I think a lot of who I am now is dictated based off of even thinking back to my family, thinking back to like who my parents were when they were growing up and when they had me. Um, and so I think that the best way to kind of really put the story and to really envision it is just be mindful that like my parents grew up in the 60s and we're children of the 80s, you know? And so my so Grand Rapids, Michigan is on like, the western side of the state, so like 2 hours away from Detroit, 2 hours away from Chicago. And it's a working class, grew up in a working class community. My grandfather worked in the factory, he retired there. My grandmother worked in a factory as a secretary for Coca-Cola. My other grandmother, she worked for Bell Telephone Company, which is, what I'm saying, like an old school phone company back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Um, and because of that, the community was very much like hands-on, supportive. And my parents met in high school. My grandparents lived around the corner from each other until I was like in high school. So I could like ride my bike from one set of grandparents' house to the other. And yeah, like my dad was an athlete, very well involved. My grandmother, was doing stuff around the city. And so um, by the time my parents got to high school and they were high school sweethearts and they got together and there was all this kind of cutesy stuff. And then my mom went to school. She went to Michigan State for a year. And my dad was a year younger than her. So he was still like in high school. So when she came back after her freshman summer, and he was getting ready to go to college. They had a great summer vacation, apparently, a great little summer bay. And then, 9 months later, they had me. So my mother only had 1 year of college, never went back to Michigan State. My dad never went to school. They just kind of started the careers and started doing what, Black folks trying to, climb the social mobility, ladder did in the 80s, which is start working. And so, my parents were young, and my grandparents were around. I was involved in the church. I played sports. My grandmother was heavily involved in the like Black community organizations. And so, not like my grandfather was involved in NAACP a little bit, but my grandmother was also involved in this other organization, the National Association for Negro Professional Business Women of Color. But yeah, so all of these things really kind of like helped to curate this environment for me of like you are Black, you are a man, you are from a working class family, but you are also deep in your religion, right? We went to church every Sunday. I was in the church, I was in the choir, I was, I was an usher. I would do speeches. I was Jesus in my church play when I was 16. Yeah. So, like all of these things kind of like really help to create my set of values, like you work hard, you take care of your family. I'm the oldest grandchild. I have a younger sister, and so like
Mm,
you're the protector of your family. And I did well in school, and so and so with this idea of like if you do well, if you strive, if you work hard, then you can also try to like avoid some of the decisions that my parents made, not going to college, you know what I'm saying? Like being in factory positions or kind of hustling, putting stuff together here and there. Um, and I had aunts and uncles who, went to college, but I think for us in our nuclear family, I was the only, like my parents didn't. That's the kind of like the first gen experience in my opinion. And yeah, man, it was just like really trying to be mindful about how to grow, how to evolve, how to see things better than they were, and not from a place of like loss. You still maintain all of those lessons about what it means to be Black in America and what it means to be a person of color and what it means to be working class and or poor at times, and folks struggling with substance abuse and growing up in all those things were around, and there was still this like level of optimism
mm,
and hope that really kind of fed me a lot. Um, and then I think that kind of really helped to springboard and to move me into a place of optimism and hope, and so I think those are the things that really kind of fed some of my values, is just family and this idea of like progress and growth. And I think that that's really been like at the pit of my stomach in a lot of different ways, and in a spirit as to kind of like how I
mm.
move, which is to continue to just like move forward, right? Like no matter what's happening, like you can don't be afraid of the hustle, don't be afraid of the grind. Like you stay 10 toes down and you put it together as best as you can, and then you use those lessons from history to kind of remind you how grateful you are of what you got and what you have, um, and that can also be like a humbling experience as well, to be mindful about like how far you have come when you use progress as your barometer. Um, so I think that's kind of really been a big sense of who I am, and what drives me is to just move forward as best as possible and also be mindful about the things that can help me move forward.
I think hearing you kind of verbalize it, maybe intrinsically, I think when we first met and school started, I think a lot of that came across like already just in the way you carried yourself, the way you introduced yourself to everybody, and the inclusive nature of like the breakout sessions, because we definitely had plenty of those on the first weekend.
Weekend intensive was wild.
It was wild. Um, okay, I think we have some good context to go off of to kind of dive into this conversation. When you first heard about the topic for this podcast and the topic for this particular episode, specifically values, what was the first thing that came up for you?
How nebulous values are. I was like, what the hell? Like, what do you mean values? I mean, which is wild because in my work, we talk a lot about values. And, as we continue to think about how to bring people together, right? At its most basic and most simplistic sense, like how do you create community? And I think, and sometimes we use this idea of, DEI in order to create spaces of inclusion. And then I also think that sometimes that gets demonized and weaponized, and it gets get taken out of context sometimes. And also the flip side of that is also to be mindful about folks' experiences. Sometimes they don't feel like diversity or multiculturalism or those things include them. So, then they feel like, well, when you talk about diversity, you're talking about BIPOC folk, or you're talking about, gay folk, or you're talking about disabled folk, or you're talking about, folks with, like undocumented folks. Like you're talking about everything except for white, cis, affluent folks. and then you kind of do some unlearning and all the other stuff. But then you kind of reposition and say, okay, well maybe DEI may or may not be the most palatable tool to think about it, but then you think about, well, what else is, how do you make people feel like they are celebrated and brought in? And when you think about under the vantage point of like belonging or affirmation or shared vision or shared values, what is the one thing that connects community members? Is it a mission statement? Is it an organizational structure? Is it a company? Is it a college? Is it just your region? Is it the physical place around where you live? Like there's something that brings people together, and that thing is really important. What is the tie that binds all? And now I think for us in my line of work and at my institution, we're finding that like shared values, that is the thing that is connecting us, right? And values change and they shift. Everybody has their own stuff, and that's perfectly fine. It would be individualistic, whether it be, communal, whether it be assertive, whether it be submissive, it's like all of the things, those things can vary. But the one thing that cannot be taken into question is, what is our shared communal value system? Like what are we here for? Because if you don't agree with that, then maybe this community isn't for you,
Hmm.
right? Like, and that's okay. You can choose community, right? You can choose family. Like, I mean, blood and water and all the other stuff, but you can choose your family. In the same way that you can choose the community that want you to be a part of. You can leave in some spaces, right? Like in not all spaces and not all opportunities you have that. I just want to be mindful of, that is a privilege to be able to say, I don't want to be a part of this community, so I'm going to pick up and move, or I'm going to leave, right? There's that. And hopefully you can still figure out something that connects you, even if that connection or those shared values are like, let's navigate this shared struggle together. Maybe survival is your value, right? Like, I don't like you, you don't like me, we don't get along, but we gotta fucking make it together. And if that is your shared value, then that is going to guide and move you in all of your decision making, right? So I still hold to the fact that this idea that like something has to connect the people, and that is your anchor. And then so you think about values. What are the organization's values? What is the community value? What is, and how do those differ, and how do you reconcile those when there's 101 different ways that you can go with it, and so when you were asking the question and when we're starting to talk about, I was like, Hanisha, you couldn't have given me one more that is more perfectly fitting to what I'm doing right now. And also, like, when I internalize and thinking about myself, like and it took me some time to sit down and really kind of process this a little bit. Um, yeah. So if anything, I actually have a question for you. So
Yeah.
what made you start with this concept of values?
Actually, you'll relate to this, but it was our ethics class,
Mm,
first quarter. Doing that exercise and understanding what your intrinsic values are and your terminal values are was actually quite enlightening for me, because it is very like core to who you are and how you conduct yourself. But I don't really know if prior to that I had really sat down and thought about what are my values. And it's about knowing yourself, but the secondary part, especially being a manager for me and being a leader, it's okay, how do my values show up in my work? But moreover, when I'm not agreeing with somebody, when I'm not seeing eye to eye with somebody, I've come to realize that, when we did that exercise in class, the values that I valued the least were, probably values that people I was getting, maybe not getting along with, valued the most. And that was actually the source of the disagreement. Is like I ultimately, maybe in a flippant way, cared less than they did about that particular value. And that was causing us. And I was like, okay, once I understood that, it became less personal. And I was able to have a conversation with this person and not feel like it was an insult to me and what I valued. And I was able to find common ground. And I think, I thought a lot about the topics I wanted to do for this season, and it felt like values, and you were definitely first in my mind when I thought about that. So the reason it felt like so well fitted is because it was intentional. So
Aw.
But,
Uh,
I think there's so much that goes into it, and it's so intertwined that it's true. The more you know yourself, the more you're acting from a position of essentially knowledge versus ignorance. And at the end of the day, yeah, I may not have the same values. And I have from some friends that maybe have different values than I do, even different political leanings, etc. But there are other values that we share that we kind of see eye to eye on. And those are what connect us. And it's more important than what divides us.
hmm Yeah, yeah, I completely agree, right? And so in those situations where you find that you are in community with somebody who has a different set of, of guardrails, different values, different kind of, foundation setting, um, like how do you move through when there are moments of contention?
Yeah, I think this also came up, I think, in, I want to say it was also in that intensive weekend.
Hmm.
But if you remember, we had that breakout group, and I was talking about the power of the pause.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think that was really important. And that took a long time for me to get to. And I don't even really know what finally caused it to click because it's not like I haven't heard many times from many different people that it's important for you to take a breath and like maybe pause before you react. But there was something about now understanding my own values more when I hear something that immediately feels upsetting or triggering. I'm taking a moment. I'm taking a moment and kind of thinking about like, ooh, okay, like where's that coming from? Why do I feel like that? And is it based in like something real, or is it something that my lens has been altered and maybe I'm not seeing it correctly?
Hmm.
And that's when I'll typically ask a couple of follow-up questions because I'm working through it. Now, I'm not perfect by any means. Sometimes I'll try my best. I'll take the pause and I'll hear more answers that then continue to rile me up. And I'm like, ooh, we're not in a space we should have this conversation. I need to take a break.
And how did you get to that point of realizing that you needed the pause?
I mean, the hard way, I guess. It was after having a lot more kind of, I guess, being too wrapped up in it and getting too upset. And the work I've done in therapy is about kind of unwinding that urgency to feel like I need to react right away, and instead finding a way to take a pause. And realizing, okay, like what am I hearing and why am I upset about it? And is it something I'm not seeing correctly? And yeah, that took a lot of time. And I think there's definitely been misunderstandings I've had with friends, misunderstandings that I've had like with everybody pretty much. It comes up everywhere, work, life. But I think it's, realizing eventually that, okay, yeah, this is not sustainable. And I need to obviously figure out like why this has happening. And I think it's just part of learning healthy communication. I mean, I'm not sure about you, and I'm sure at some point I'll have a whole topic on communication, but I don't think good communication was necessarily ever modeled for me.
Mm,
So that is definitely one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, like, yeah, you're gonna figure that out eventually because you have to.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear that, and you know what, man? Like, how dope is it to be able to like choose your own path, and to be able to
100%.
like sit down and actually figure out yourself, and either through experience or through just like sitting looking at yourself naked in the mirror, like, bro, like I don't what is happening? Because you mentioned therapy, and I had tried a couple of different experiences with therapy. My first therapy experience was right before COVID. Like we stopped
Mm.
because of COVID.
Was it in
Um,
person?
it was in person.
Okay.
It was in person, like 2020, or something like that. And we were still in Michigan,
Okay.
uh, and so we were there, and I was seeing this, this guy, and he was awesome. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. And I was going through trying to figure out some things related to like some of the decision making and some of my triggers and all of that stuff. And again, this is after like years of like, I don't, black man, I don't need no therapy, and I'll go to church if I need to talk to God or all that dumb shit.
Yeah.
And, all that stuff, man. And so I did, and I really grew a lot from that experience. And then I started doing like telehealth for a little bit afterwards, and that was fine. But then I got moved to California, started doing somatics, somatic therapy, and just being able to like listen to my body. And if my heart is beating, that tells me something. If I feel butterflies in my stomach, that tells me something. If my speech pattern picks up, that tells me something. If I'm sweating, that tells me something. And that really also not only helps me to like hear more about myself, but then it also helped me understand the values that were guiding my internal
Mm,
compass, like there are moments that I'm challenged, and the challenge feels healthy. And then so I think, then I notice these certain physiological responses. Or there's a certain situation if I'm moving around and I see something that looks scary. But again, I'm a tall, athletic build. I played sports my entire life: basketball, football, track, all this stuff. So I'm like, I also have a privilege there where I don't fear physical assault or physical harassment or things that other folks do. So I'm like, okay, I see something, it looks kind of creepy, but I'm straight. I got it. I'll be all right. And then that versus like getting into like walking into a meeting with VPs or walking into a meeting with directors, and then feeling a whole different set of sensations, and hearing conversations and feeling all these things and understanding like the values in this space don't align with what's natural to me, exactly to what you said. Like we're misaligned. I feel it, and now I'm seeing that therapy is helping me to understand what's guiding and moving me. And that's a beautiful opportunity to kind of sit back and realize that level of growth.
100%. Have you ever had one of those moments where you kind of feel a mismatch from your actions to like what your like body is telling you, like that kind of like butterfly feeling where you're like, oh, something's not sitting right with me, but you're like, I don't know, suppressing it, maybe not intentionally listening to it. And was it related to a mismatch on like what you were doing versus what you were saying when it came to your values?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it shows up a lot in my home, right? Like, and not in a bad way, but I think it helps me to understand, like, if I'm feeling something, but I'm trying to mask it, right? Just simple, small, any good, bad, indifferent, all the things. I'm consciously telling myself, like, nope, it's okay. Nope, it's not a thing. Nope, this experience or this conversation or this set of reactions is fine. But then I'm seeing something and feeling something else, then that has been really helpful in teaching me the emotional intelligence to be able to sit down and be like, okay, actually, what is going on? What am I feeling? And then taking that pause, and then coming back around to it a little bit later and be like, actually, I was, like I was nervous, or I was embarrassed, or I was insecure, or I was, or I was angry. You know what I'm saying? And then be able to communicate that from a place of productivity versus just like, then I'm moving around and tripping over shit and, folding towels just because I, want to be in this room versus that. You know what I'm saying? Like things like that. Um, so yeah, man, being in the house of four women has taught me a lot about about being able to like truly continue to align myself, and I thank God for it because like I would be a different person if I had three boys at home. I'd be a different person if my wife wasn't the person that she was. And it's taught me so much about myself and the world around me.
Have you adopted any of her values, you think? Things that maybe weren't value of high value for you before, but over time became
Yeah,
more valuable.
yep. I mean, a healthy conflict, right?
Mm,
And yeah, and like I grew up um in a space where I don't and so my parents got divorced when I was like 10 or 11. And then my mother got remarried a couple of years later. But I think for me growing up in the 90s, and by the way, I'm going to turn 40 in June. So growing up in the 90s, in my community, in my family, in the place around me, I wouldn't often see healthy conflict and healthy movement through conflict. Like, and it wasn't all bad. It wasn't, throwing chairs and stuff like that. But it certainly, knowing my family and knowing my father, knowing my mother now, I'm like, I see why y'all didn't last. Like it makes sense to me why, because you two have different communication styles, different value systems, different personality types. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like if anything, that's beautiful when that does happen. You bring people together with all of those differences and different, colors and pops and experiences. And then you have to consciously teach one another, like, how do you still live in harmony even when things are sometimes misaligned, or folks have different systems, or folks have different compasses. And so I think my wife really taught me the value of like being able to sit down and take a pause if necessary, being able to like to listen to myself, to investigate, to pull back layers a little bit and think through my own triggers and trauma that has nothing to do with her, nothing to do with kids, nothing to do with work, nothing to do with the world around me. And it's just like rooted in how I was raised and how I was conditioned. So yeah, that's a big one. Is just being able to like sit down in it and be thankful that, now I get a chance to see that like the sky's a little bit bluer than it was, what I'm saying, before we got married, and the colors pop a little bit more and stuff like that, because I can see things differently.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that.
Oh, I thank you, friend. We celebrated our 11-year anniversary a couple of weeks ago. So
Gosh, happy
yeah,
belated.
well, thank you. Yeah, so it's been a wild ride. And it's been a beautiful ride, and then one that's really been helpful for me to kind of figure out how to be a more full human being and understanding all of the cycles, the ups and downs and the waves, and then use that to kind of like scale up.
That's a good point too, because I mean, at the end of the day, your values aren't static. They
Hmm.
go through all kinds of changes based on
Hmm.
the people that you meet, based on the events that happen around you. Um, I definitely like can see how like the especially for you and I having like grown up on the East Coast, come to the West Coast. I mean, there's probably a bunch of new values I got when I moved here.
But that's a whole nother podcast episode. It's just like, East Coasters move to California. Like, what are observations of being in this place? Because
I
it's
got a
so
whole. We
wild.
can do a larger group for that sometime.
And so, like, and when you think about how you've grown over time, like you mentioned some of the therapy, you mentioned being in California, the regions, and how that's adjusted and kind of shifted some of your value systems. What does Hanisha now look like in compared to Hanisha 10 years ago?
Goodness. Well, even Hanisha of a year ago was drastically different than Hanisha of today. So Hanisha of 10 years ago, goodness, I had just moved to California. It was like only a couple months. I moved here into California November of 2014.
Hmm.
So I didn't know it at the time, but I was kind of coming off of essentially like being stuck in a very traumatic space, being stuck in my childhood home and kind of dealing with the environment and being in Jersey and everything that came with that. And then I moved here and eventually that kind of slowly left me. But I never really understood at that time what was actually going on. But I think back then I was just looking to get a job. I was looking to make the money, your classic millennial hustle.
Hmm. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I could provide for myself. I wanted to make sure that I could be financially stable. I had grown up financially unstable. And that was my own trauma to carry, that I had grown up in such a way that my value system was attached to trauma. It was attached to like, you know, being afraid and not knowing if I can go to the doctor because I didn't know if we could afford it. It was tied up in, hey, I kind of don't want to go home today because I don't know if there's going to be people arguing, and or it would be like taking, my sister reminded me of this like a year or so ago. I was like taking her to like the playground and letting her play, and she sees this as this beautiful thing. And I'm pretty sure because I don't remember because at the end of the day, I've now realized I have PTSD and I've actually lost huge portions of my childhood, and they're there but it's kind of repressed at this point. I don't remember this, but I'm thinking like, why would hell would I take her to a playground in the middle of the night? And I was like, oh, I probably took her there because my parents were arguing and I was trying to take her somewhere safe. So my values come from trauma, my values come from being the eldest daughter that comes from being an immigrant. There are all kinds of very lovely treats wrapped up in that, like codependency and porous boundaries and a whole bunch of lovely acronyms. I'm sure my therapist is going to love me rattling off. But I think moving to California gave me a chance to let go of that. And over time, ever since I started therapy 4 years ago in October, I was actually able to start unwinding who I actually was underneath everything else once I stopped living from a place of survival. And so I'm still figuring that out even to this day. And I think it's almost like an accelerated growth, especially in the last year. Because one thing they don't tell you about therapy is sometimes it takes a year, maybe over a year, before you actually start getting to the like core of the onion. Because it takes that long sometimes to kind of peel back all the layers and find the real problem or
Mhm.
challenge, perhaps is the better way to phrase that.
Yeah.
My values today, I think even going through the exercise, yeah, with in class was understanding like, oh, okay, like probably one of my core values I would say is integrity. And I see integrity as something more than just honesty. So like I see honesty as like you are committed to being truthful about what you say. I see integrity as, yeah, you're truthful about what you say, but you're also truthful in what you do. So it is both your actions and your words combined. That's what actually integrity is. And so I think I can't even really pinpoint why that became my core value, but that is very much at the core of the decisions that I choose to make. Like if I say I'm going to do something, I will do it. And that's kind of how I conduct myself. But at the same time, things like values like family are lower for me just based on the way that I grew up, and values like friends are incredibly high because I'm part of a generation who believes in chosen family.
Hmm.
And choosing what that looks like to me, and it most of the time ends up being the like friends that are closest to me rather than the family that I share blood with.
First off, snaps to you.
Thank
Snaps,
you.
snaps, snaps. I don't know if they can hear this, but snaps. And you mentioned something that I actually felt. I felt a ping towards, and you mentioned integrity, right? And this is the people pleaser in me.
Mm,
Is that I grew up and I realized that I've been called many things over the course of my life, um, and I've been called a liar quite like not as much recently, but before, and it was people pleasing, and I think and that also goes to the place of trauma, right? Like as being the oldest child who grew up around instability or confrontation or divorce or lost love, it was so important to me to just make everybody happy, even if that meant that what I truly wanted and desired was different from what I told people, right? So I was a classic example of like, I am saving face, I am smiles, I am whatever. And then on the other side, I was a fucking, like either a savage there was just misalignment between what I wanted and what I communicated to people around me and what I truly felt. And you talk about values that I learned from my wife. Integrity is probably at the top of that list, bro, because it took me a long time to be okay with saying like, this is what I want and this is what I think, and this is and if we don't think the same way, then that's okay, right? Because I was always so afraid of confrontation that I felt like
yes.
it was so easy for me to lie and so easy for me to be deceitful and so easy for me to be deceptive because I didn't feel like I owed you my truth. I felt like I would give you the truth that I wanted you to have in order for us to be in this harmonious relationship.
It's so interesting, especially, with a partner, it's like finding like the ways that your values kind of bend and flex. And this is why I mention integrity too, is I was finding myself in direct conflict with, some of these like situations I would get into at work where I knew I had to be flexible, but it felt like it was a direct conflict with my integrity. And I was trying to find a way. Like when you're a manager, like it is a really weird spectrum sometimes where you can't be 100% yourself. And that in a time where I'm trying to be the most authentic version of me felt like such a paradox, where you're asking me to be somebody I'm not, until I like understood that I could be flexible on that particular value when it came to the role I have to fill in that moment.
How important is it to you to be in perfect alignment with organizations or systems value wise, right? Because again, I think that sometimes some of those things are like malleable, like you can compromise on some things. Some folks are like, no, like it has to be a firm fit. And you also prioritize, like, I'm not going to do this and do this. But when it comes to like, this type of culture, this type of practice, like, I don't really know, but I'm willing to still be engaged with it because the outcome or because the result is something desirable, right? So I guess my overall wondering is, like how how perfectly aligned do you feel like your values personally have to be in order for you to be down and committed to something?
So I think it's interesting because I think it is possible. Talking about like being high functioning, sometimes it's like, okay, well, I can power through even if I maybe don't agree with the values of the organization. But I think if there's anything I've learned, especially in this like latest era, is that shit's draining. I can't do it for a sustained period of time. Short term, okay, maybe I could find a way to be okay with that if there's a benefit cost analysis there. But long term, it will drain me personally because I know I'm flexing to do something or be something that doesn't feel authentic. Like
Yeah,
there's definitely companies in the valley that I will not touch for all the money in the world. And that is because their values do not line up with mine. And there is literally no dollar value you could give me to make me go work there.
yeah, yeah. What has it felt like to you when you are in spaces where you are perfectly aligned?
I think it's an ease. And I think I felt that, amongst our cohort and, working with some of our teams, at school, it's like it kind of feels like, oh, I found my community. I found the group of people that understand me and are on my wavelength. I've even talked about this with a couple of our other friends where it's like, okay, at the end of the day, like I have limited energy and this is definitely true the older I get. I just don't want to deal with bullshit. So if I'm not gonna surround myself with people that I'm not aligned with at the end of the day.
Hmm.
And it means I'm so much more selective. That's because time is so precious and we don't really get that until we're in our 30s. And you and I get it. Like there's limited time. There's 10 million things pulling us in 10 million different directions.
Hmm.
So how can I be intentional with the people I'm surrounding myself with, because those people also end up becoming the like core of the values that you adopt, because that stuff is contagious. Like you will become like the people you surround yourself with. I think that was even brought up by one of our professors in the summer. So that's kind of how I see it. Is I can, yeah, going back to your earlier question, I can be flexible, but I think it's draining, and at the end of the day, like it's not worth it. I don't think it's worth it in the long run. Do you think you could do it?
I have, right? And so I think this is, I've been lucky enough to work in lots of different systems and places across the country, right? So after I did my undergrad at the University of Michigan, then I stayed in Ann Arbor for another 2 years, and I worked, did an internship, and then I did like this AmeriCorps Vista program, and I was doing like nonprofit stuff. Um, and on paper, it should have been perfect. I was going to be working with local high school kids in impoverished areas, and and building like civic engagement, leadership development, and going into the schools and mentoring. I was like, bro, this is everything that I want to do right now. And the nonprofit that I was paired with was such an egregious misalignment, and I was like, this is hell. Hell, like it undid everything that I had hoped I would get out of that experience, because there was such a chasm between me and the leadership of that organization. And then, and then pivot and go to another. And then from there, I moved to Houston, Texas in 2010. And then find a nonprofit there. And I was like, oh, this is such a breath breath of fresh air because there was all that stuff. And, then so kind of moved through that and I went to there and then I left nonprofit, and then I started teaching. And so I went and I was like, yeah, I consciously want to go into education, public education to be able to learn all these systems. And then so I went into the school. We're opening up a brand new school, man. Kit Peace, shout out. I don't know if anybody in Houston is going to hear this, but straight down the street from U of H, go Cougs. We opened up a school and it was again like that perfect alignment. Long days, trying to, learn how to be a teacher and dealing with classroom management, pedagogy, and now I'm raising a family, what I'm saying? My wife, my future wife is here and all this other stuff. But the alignment was there.
Mm,
And it was hard and it was exhausting. And there was a really tough, difficult time in my life in general. So like I look back to then, I'm like, I cringe at a lot of times, but I think there are parts of me being in that organization that I'm eternally grateful for. The leadership of that school was great, hugely supportive. And then like I moved, and then from there we moved to Nashville, Tennessee. And then I was at Tennessee Department of Education for a year, working out of the commissioner's office, doing special projects with them in the governor's office. And so we're traveling across the state, going to districts, doing all this stuff. And I was like, this is great, but now I'm in politics. Now I'm in government. I'm a kid trying to care for families and stuff. And I'm away from the families that I care for. I'm away from the people that I felt like I had an impact for. I felt like I wasn't being able to be the translator and the interpreter for like, this
mm,
is system, this is policy. And, it was not aligned. It was not doing what I wanted to. And at some point I was like, this is not, I am not the best person for this job. I am not ideal. This ain't the kind of place for me. So I left, put that bitch, you know what I'm saying? Like, and went back into the classroom. And then again, oh, right? Like the skies parted and then the rain stopped. And then I went and helped open up two schools. Shout out Rocket Ship Northeastern, over off of Dickinson Road in Nashville, man. And then opened up another school, Rocket Ship United Academy. Um, and again alignment and it was beautiful, but there are moments that I like just and so that being able to feel like and to see what it feels like and how my body's talking to me, how the world is responding to me, how the universe keeps either referring me or doubling down, this is the wrong decision for you, bro, like this ain't for you. And I
mm.
was hard-headed trying to push through because of career and because of position and because of status and all this other stuff. And then at some point, I just, continued to grow and learn, and was like, I just need to be in spaces that speak to me and that heal me and that affirm me and that help me to be the best, employee, servant, husband, father, brother, homie, son, all the things that I can be. Um, because that stuff was tough. That was really, really tough. And actually, I want to pause because you mentioned something about class and about values and about learning stuff. And I don't know if you remember, but it was like after the first day, and I said something to you, and I was like, we've, been in a couple small groups, but you cool.
I
And
vividly remember that because it made my day.
I was like, everybody else is cool too, but like you cool, and we gonna be homies. Because I saw that alignment, right? Like, and I was still learning and understanding and everybody around me, but it was so clear to me because of how you presented yourself, how you spoke, how you were silent in moments. I was like, I think that we have lots of things in common. And that, and again, shout out to everybody else in our cohort. Everybody's amazing. But you were like the first person I was like, all right, I found one. I found one. So
Oh,
shout out
I
to you.
appreciate that. I mean, just as much as when I heard it then and I hear it now, like it definitely it made my day because I think yeah, I talked to a couple of people about it afterwards, but I think starting school was in and of itself like a shift in values for me. Because I think I wouldn't necessarily say confidence was a value that I had, but I think it's a growing one because I'm starting to kind of settle into my skin a little bit more and settle into my abilities. And I think part of that is, I've worked at the same company for over 10 years. So I've been in this bubble for 10 years and I don't
Hmm.
really feel tested outside of that bubble. And so I'm finally getting a chance to try stuff outside of that bubble without having to necessarily start a new job. and school is kind of giving me that exposure to kind of try and see like, okay, like, yeah, like what type of people are there, especially if, if you're in a master's program, you are committed to learning. You're a specific type
Mhm.
of person
Or a
already.
geek or a nerd. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Like, are we
I don't
masochists, bro?
know. I don't know. I've been reflecting because we're in break right now, and I'm like, oh wow, like I have another week, and I'm like, sometimes in the afternoons, evenings, I don't know what to do with myself, and I'm like, well, look forward to like that's not going to be the case soon. So make sure
We
you're.
got a week and a half.
I know there's not much time left, but you touched on something interesting too about also having opened these schools and being a father to three yourself. How does value show up in terms of how you parent?
Ooh, that's a good one. And honestly, I can answer that question how I think I can, but the best people to answer that question is Kyla, Kinsey, and Zuri, right? Like because there are moments where we're at home and we'll like role play or we'll do something silly or they'll be like, they'll put on their daddy voice or kind of do the things. And they'll provide like a window, like they'll help me see things about myself that I don't see, and I'm like, or I'll just see them naturally grow, right? Like I'll see them do things. Oh, I understand how or why you did that because it's either in direct opposition to me or it's in alignment with me or there's a kink to it. You know what I'm saying? Um, and so yeah, I mean, I think I tried to infuse some values, but I think but one of the other things that this world and this life has taught me is that like what I intend on isn't always going to be the case, like just the same way that I can grow a plant and then it can literally start to sprout towards the light this way or start to crisscross this way. Like I am just a planter in the water, but then you're going to grow and do whatever the hell you want to. um and so I think we try to infuse a certain set of honesty and care and compassion and patience and joy, right? Because just as much as I think that like, and I don't know if like growth or evolution or change is a value, but I think that that's really important to me. um Joy is just as important to like who I am. That is a core being of mine. A few years, I think it might have been a year and a half ago, I was tapped and invited to do the speaker series at Santa Clara called The Search for What Matters. And so every year they tap a faculty member, a staff member, and a Jesuit because we work at a Jesuit institution. So they get one of the priests and they come and they do the speaker series for the entire community and they ask one question. Um, uh, Goodness gracious, I'm literally blanking the question. Oh, uh, what means what's important to you and why or something like what do you search for or why or something like that. um and mine was on joy. Mine was on the fragility of black malehood, how it's always attacked, how I've always seen that, how I was raised and how I was brought up in order to like really be mindful about the fragility of black life. um, and how to show love to folks, how to care for people, how to be strong and sturdy and resilient, how to be emotional when necessary, how to do all of those things. And so that taught me a lot, and that speaker series really helped me after a lot of that reflection going into it to be like joy is a core tenet of mine, right? One of my favorite books is Pleasure Activism. It's over on my bookcase, pleasure activism, and that really also allowed me to take ownership and be proud of like what does it mean for me to claim joy in all of the ways, right? Physical, emotional, spiritual, through environment, through all of these things, because just because who I am and how I'm wired. um and so when I think about my daughters, think about the values that I try to instill in them. It's again, it is hard work, it's care, it's love, it's compassion, it's transparency, it's working hard, it's taking care of your community, and at the top of that list is joy. If it
Mm.
ain't K-pop Demon Hunters turned up on 10, or if it's not, Hamilton, which we're going to see in theaters tomorrow, or if it's not a bunch of, like edited Jay-Z or Lil Wayne or something in the background, like or music or food, or the dog is running around, or we're, throwing one another on the couch like that. That's important to me as a value. And that's one that I really try to infuse in my kids. for a bunch of reasons. A lot of it being rooted in trauma.
No, I connect with that. But I have an interesting question because you're phrasing it also as joy. How do you see joy as different than happiness? Or
Mm.
are they different?
Yeah, I think they're different. I think
Okay.
happy is more of an emotion, right? Like a happy is like in this moment, it's an immediate thing. Like,
Mm,
and it can sway, it can pendulum, it can move, right? I'm happy 1 minute, I'm hungry 1 minute, I'm frustrated 1 minute, I'm sad 1 minute. I think joy is a state of being, right? Like it's a calling, it's a chase, it's something that I'm seeking. I'm seeking joy. I'm trying to find joy, and I'm trying to infuse it in all of the ways that I can. Um, Now, I think that my quest for joy, and this goes to something that you were, in thinking about this question around values. I also think that values can be like a double-edged sword sometimes, right? Because you can claim it, you can chase it, but for me sometimes that's showing up in ways that, like, I am not satisfied. I'm unsettled. I'm constantly trying to find the vibe. I'm always looking for something to make me happy. And I think that that's got me in trouble a lot over my life, either being too adventurous or being too gluttonous or being too lustful, right? Like, you can think about all of the things, you know what I'm saying? But it's like, but I want to be happy. I want to be joyful, and then you got to teach yourself discipline. You got to teach yourself how to manage that stuff. Um, you know, even my chase towards progress and change, right? Oh, yeah, is like I'm always looking for the level up. Like I've lived in Michigan, Texas, Tennessee, Michigan. All of my daughters have been born in different states. You know what I'm saying? Because we're moving, and because it's career opportunities, and we
yeah.
continue to scale up. My wife is the only family member, the only person directly, in my family that has a PhD. Like, we were going through the process. We were like, I don't know anything about this, but I know that you about to get a doctorate, and that means that we're gonna boss up. So let's get it. And sometimes we sit back and be like, but did that make us happy though? Right? Like, did that serve
Ooh,
us? And
yeah.
in this quest for what we believe our values to be, there also has to be this level of accountability, this level of self-awareness, and this level of discipline to kind of help you put it all into perspective. And what do you think towards that? Like, how values can actually counterbalance themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, and I think it's changing too, because I think, when I was younger, I had a fixation with the value of like your word and time. So as a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, like somebody like clearly like should be, you're a child, so you're making like decisions and have it from that child space. But I would get mad at my friends if they canceled plans, and it's like, it's not the end of the world. Like, what is wrong with you? But to me, at a time where my parental figures were not true to their word, they weren't keeping me safe, like mentally, emotionally, like I wanted to find that in the world, in the people that I had, and I would seek it out and then get mad at people if they didn't live up to that bar that they didn't even know they were being measured against. And so I understand completely what you mean when it could be taken too far. And I think this is what I've probably learned probably in the last 6 to 10 months is like, okay, yeah, there's having values, but then there's also finding the moments and the right places to be flexible
Mm,
about those values, because at the end of the day the world is full of gray, it's not black and white. We are seeing things in different shades of gray, and there might be a reason it makes sense to uphold a value in one moment, and another moment where it you have to be flexible and it doesn't make sense, and it's not suited to that moment. And finding that, and I think that I don't imagine that's necessarily a process that would ever end. I think that's an ongoing thing. The more you learn, the more you kind of adjust what those grays are, and you find your boundaries within what you're comfortable with, and finding the way, honestly, if even if you break a value, or if you feel responsible for somehow, you know, acting against your own values, finding the grace to be like, it's okay. Like, just because, I said something today or that I regret, or did something that I regret, doesn't mean tomorrow can't be a new day and I can try again and it doesn't have to then taint everything just because I had one lapse or one moment where I wasn't my best self.
You said the G word. Ooh, grace. Mm, And what does grace look like for you in those moments where you feel there's a breach in values, right? Like either with a partner or with a colleague or with yourself.
I think it's really easy for me when I've stepped over that to like it used to be easier for me to kind of like beat myself up where I'll be like really hard on myself. Like, oh, like, you're supposed to have integrity and look what you did. You were supposed to, be better than that. You weren't supposed to repeat the patterns of your parents, but look, you said something and you hurt somebody and you did it maliciously. You knew you were saying something that hurt somebody. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm human. At the end of the day, I'm not perfect and I will make mistakes. And I think what's more important, you know, it, the fact that I said it is important, but how I respond after I say it is probably more important. Like in that moment, okay, oh yeah, I really shouldn't have said that. I apologize. That shouldn't have been how that came across. And I didn't mean it that way. And detailing how I'm going to work on that and do better. Because I think at the end of the day, like and lapses would happen and it have happened. And I think what always hurt me the most is when, sometimes somebody says something, they know they've hurt your feelings, but they don't apologize
Yeah.
about it. And that kind of sits with you. And it's like, it means a lot to take ownership of something and be like, yeah, I should have done better, or I didn't mean it that way, and I definitely didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Like those things, those phrases do matter because it's taking ownership of the words that you put out there, like they mean something.
Yeah. Do you, and I've seen folks do this, and I guess the question is, how do you communicate your values to people that surround you? And I've seen this happen in
Mm.
kind of recent ways, either, like somewhat of like of an explicit contract, or, or even just being very upfront on the front end, like, hey, I know that we're learning about one another. These things are really important to me, right? So that there's no ambiguity. Um, and so like how or is it just through like being in closeness and then at some point your actions speak for yourself?
Maybe it's a little bit of both because I'm trying to think. Like, obviously, the newest group of people I've met is our cohort and our close friends. And I think some of it came out naturally and some of it came out, more subtly over time. Like I've definitely had a couple conversations with Somya about like our family experiences, our lived in experiences, and that happened pretty early on. I remember having a conversation with Bree during intensive weekend and kind of sharing with her about my experiences with therapy. And, she was so interested to hear about my journey and how open I was with my journey. And so I'm finding, I think, still my voice in terms of what's the right amount of sharing to do. And when I kind of meet somebody new and want to share, like intentionally, but not like in a overshare and like advocate kind of way. Like, you should understand that these things matter to me, but I'm not like preaching something necessarily. Like this is the way to be and whatnot. And I think like when it comes to probably one of the most things I'm more transparent about is I'll typically talk about the fact that I'm in therapy pretty openly now. And sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. I've definitely had those experiences, and I'm like, okay,
In
like,
2025 people are feeling that.
yeah, yeah. And I think, like, okay, like, I try to look at it as a gift now. Like, thank you for letting me know that this is the type of information that you like and maybe what the type of person you may be. And so that may not be my community. And that's fine. I actually figured that sooner than most people would. I appreciate
Uh-huh.
that.
Yep, yep. No, I agree with that. Okay, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Do you think that, as we kind of come to the top of the hour here, what do you kind of feel about, any of the values maybe that you did during that school exercise surprise you? Did you see anything on that list that you didn't expect to see? Or is there something missing from the list that should have been on the list?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think one that is important to me that a lot of people may not be aware of is, or maybe it is apparent, but like I'm really big um on not only harmony but also just authenticity, right? Like
Mm.
and that's something that's taken me a long time to be able to digest. I figured out like my secret sauce like pretty early on. Like I did well. I did oratorical contests when I was like in grade school through my grandmother's organization. So I would travel around different parts of Michigan and Indiana. And I was like in third grade to get up in
Wow.
front of a group of folks and be able to speak and be evaluated on that. And and so like I learned to be able to command an audience. I was a teacher, right? Like I'm very used to being in
Yes.
front of people and speaking. And so like I got the charisma down. I got the thing, you know what I'm saying? Like, and so all that stuff. But I realized also that I realized that that was a crutch because I was a people pleaser and I was inauthentic and I was a liar and I had habits that were, contrary to what I truly wanted to do because I felt like I was living for everyone else's gaze as being the oldest, first boy, grandchild, both sides, first gen. You know what I'm saying? Filling all of the first, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I was like, my life is everyone's but mine. Like my life is not my own. I'm living my life for my parents, for my sister, for my homies, for black men, for people who've never been in community with, intellectual black men and all this other stuff. And so it took me a really long time to be able to actually sit with what it felt like to just be truly myself and be authentic and just show up 100. That's still something that I navigate. I feel like I'm a lot better at it. I'm much more aware of it, and now I have much more tolerance for fake shit.
Mm.
I
Oh yeah.
and so like I can even respect someone's authenticity and someone's individuality if it's something that I don't even understand, right? But I can see it from a mile away now, and I think that that's a value that I going back to what you said earlier about how things change. I think that that's something about me that I think at surface level would seem natural because of how confident I can appear and how social and I'm going around kissing babies and shaking hands and doing all the, politics stuff. And sometimes I still feel like a lot of that is a facade. Um, and and I think now I am much more grounded in the call to just find something that just feels just like organic and true and honest and authentic.
I know completely what you mean. That's is kind of like the authentic era. I think for me probably one of the more surprising things on the list that I didn't expect to see on the list was probably ambition. I didn't actually think that was a core value for me, but I guess it is, and then kind of thinking on it a little bit, I kind of in sometimes some ways do kind of live up to that Slytherin stereotype, or I do have ambition, but my experiences, my life background has led me to kind of suppress some of that ambition because of the connotation that it has about being too similar or too close to attributes that my father has. And so I reject actively that part of myself. So part of maybe the last year or so is kind of coming to terms with like, okay, like I do have ambition, and to have ambition doesn't mean it has to show up in the same way it showed up for him, which was often in a very like manipulative and kind of egotistical way. And so I suppressed it because I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be that person. But reality is, like, I do want things for myself. I do have ambition. I want to do things to better the world. I initially, went into a science background because I thought I would work for NASA one day and change the world. So, perspective shifts, and then it kind of shifted like, okay, I'm going to change the lives of my fellow employees at my company because ultimately I'm fixing their IT problems, and that changes their days. So that's changing the world on a different scale. And now the course that the work that we do at school, and, whatever may come out of this podcast is like, yeah, that this is still me changing the world just in a different way. And it's okay to have ambition, and it's okay to kind of seek more want more. Because I think also part of that is like the trauma survival background. It's like, well, you want a steady job, don't you? Like, why would you want anything else besides that?
Goodness gracious. We are attacking demons. That is so true,
Too bad.
bro.
We need the K-pop Demon Hunter soundtrack playing while we do that.
It's so good.
It's so good.
We were listening in some like I mean because I'm the Kinsey our middle daughter, and she's right now she's in seventh grade, so she's 12, and she's in the theater. She's doing like a local Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and some other stuff, and so she's really into music and song and dance. And she told me that they were starting to play music on like the radio and other stuff, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. And I'm thinking like whatever. But we were in the car like yesterday, and some Huntrix came on, and I said, you got to be kidding me, man. And here we
I love
are.
it. I love it. It's transcending backgrounds. It's transcending cultures, languages. Like I
It's
love it.
awesome.
I'm
It's
here for it.
awesome. Yeah, and that's a whole another again another podcast because I'm curious to know as we continue to grow, K-pop's influence on worldwide culture. But I also am curious about if that is now starting to phase and surpass like hip hop as the dominant voice and vehicle for the youth. Um, yeah, so just lots of thoughts.
Yeah, I mean that could be a whole conversation. I watched a YouTube channel, React, and they were talking about the like doing it's a game show essentially with a list of guests, and they basically do various games. And this one was around the 2024, 2025 songs. Man, I didn't recognize majority of the 2025 songs. They're all TikTok songs, and like music is being
uh,
created for that less than 2 minute time frame. And I was another article was talking about bridges are getting lost now because they're too short. And I'm like, okay, yeah, interesting. But yeah, the whole K-pop like movement, and I watch plenty of Korean dramas. I love me my Korean dramas. I That could definitely be a whole conversation in of itself.
absolutely.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me, Chris. I'm gonna close out with the final question. And so we kind of spent the last hour talking about values. And so what is at the root of values for you?
At the root of values for me lies authenticity and lies hope, right? Like I think you adopt values either to move away or toward something. Again, maybe trauma, maybe a future, maybe hope, maybe ambition or whatever. Um, but I think that's maybe ingrained and genetic or acquired or hereditary, whatever. Um, but I think at the root of values is this idea that like you know I'm moving towards something for a reason, and I'm using these tools in order to get me there. Good, bad, ugly, or indifferent.
I love it. I love it.
Well, thank you so much, Anisha. This has been an absolute pleasure and a blessing, man. Really appreciate you, homie. This has been fun.
Absolutely. And thank you for being on. And I'm sure I got a couple ideas now already for follow-up episodes. So for anyone listening, add in the comments if you'd like to have Chris back on.
Thank you. I
Awesome.
appreciate y'all. Love y'all.
Thank you, Chris.